I don't know why I'm telling this story. It's the wine.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Hylar.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
At the beginning here of chapter 45, After the Storm, and our symbol is the rising sun of Kyrian.
Just a literal storm that passed during the battle, plus the battle's a storm, reference Nynaeve's abilities, all that stuff. There's a lot of layers to that title.
Sitting on a small boulder, jutting from the foot of the slope, Matt winced as he pulled his broad-brimmed hat lower against the mid-morning sun, partly to shield his eyes from the sun. There was another thing he did not want to see, though cuts and bruises reminded him, especially the arrow slash along his temple that his hat pressed against. An ointment from Darred's saddlebags had stopped the bleeding, there and elsewhere, yet everything still hurt, and most of it stung. That part would grow worse. The heat of the day was just beginning to take hold, but sweat was beating up on his face, and already dampening his small clothes and shirt. Idly, he wondered whether autumn would ever come to Kyrian. At least discomfort kept him from thinking how tired he was. Even after a night with no sleep, he would have lain awake in a feather bed, much less blankets on the ground. Not that he wanted to be anywhere near his tent in any case. A fine bloody to-do. Nearly killed. I'm sweating like a pig. I can't find a comfortable place to stretch out, and I don't dare get drunk. Blood and bloody ashes. He stopped fingering a slice across the chest of his coat. An inch difference, and that spear would have gone through his heart. Light, but that man had been good, and put that part out of his mind. Not that it was easy, with what was going on all around him. For once, the Terrans and Kyrianen did not seem to mind seeing Aiel tents in every direction. There were even Aiel right in the camp, and almost as miraculously, Terrans mingling with the Kyrianen among the smoky cook fires. Not that anyone was eating. The kettles had not been set on the fires, although you could smell meat burning somewhere. Instead, most were as drunk as they could manage on wine, brandy, or Aiel usquai, laughing and celebrating. Not far from where he sat, a dozen defenders of the stone, stripped to sweaty shirt sleeves, were dancing to the claps of 10 times as many watchers. In a line, with arms around each other's shoulders, they stepped so quickly that it was a wonder none of them tripped or kicked the man next to them. For another circle of onlookers, near a 10-foot pole stuck in the ground, Matt hastily averted his eyes, as many Aiel men were doing some kicking of their own. Matt assumed it was a dance. Another Aiel was playing the pipes for them. They leapt as high as they could, flung one foot even higher, then landed on that foot, and immediately leapt upward again, faster and faster, sometimes spinning like horizontal tops at the height of their leaps, or turning somersaults or backflips. 7 or 8 Tyrans and Kyrianen sat nursing broken bones from trying it, all the while cheering and laughing like madmen, passing a stone crock of something back and forth. In other places, other men were dancing, and maybe singing. It was hard to say in the din. Without stirring, he could count 10 flutes, not to mention twice as many tin whistles, and a skinny Kyrianen in a ragged coat was blowing something that looked part flute and part horn with some odd bits tossed in. And there were countless drums, most of them pots being banged with spoons. In short, the camp was bedlam and a ball rolled into one. He recognized it. Mainly from those memories he could still assign to other men if he concentrated hard enough. A celebration of still being alive. One more time they had walked under the Dark One's nose and survived to tell the tale. One more dance along the razor's edge finished. Almost dead yesterday, maybe dead tomorrow, but alive, gloriously alive today. He did not feel like celebrating. What good was being alive if it meant living in a cage? He shook his head as Darred, Estion, and a heavy-set red-haired Aielman he did not know staggered by, holding each other up, barely audible through the clamor. Darred and Estion were trying to teach the taller man between them the words to Dance with Jack of the Shadows. I thought I'd cut it there, but then we hear 2 verses in this chapter, as Matt's observing. Of course, Matt observes, the sun-dark fellow showed no interest in learning. Of course, he would not, unless they convinced him it was a proper battle hymn. Which, when I read that, I thought, isn't it, though? It's a battle hymn. Yeah?
It's a battle hymn for non-Aiel. The Aiel probably have their own way of singing their own songs that they consider worthy of going into battle, and it doesn't match with those.
I guess so.
More of a marching song, really.
Yeah, and I could sort of see it. They probably have some songs that you learn when you become a warrior, and those are the songs, that you're allowed to sing. Because Aielmen...
There's a pretty big taboo against singing, yeah.
You sing for the dead, you sing when you're going into battle, you can sing the battle hymns when you're leaving battle, but otherwise you do not sing or dance, isn't that right?
No, they dance.
Yeah? Dancing school, but not singing?
Yeah, totally. That's the whole, jumping and stomping thing.
Unless a Maiden of the Spear manages to get you to sing. Whatever that means. We've done some debating on that subject.
Now, the official thing is you get taken Gaishain, and once you're Gaishain can be forced, that can be their punishment, is singing, basically.
Right.
For entertainment.
Well, you're not a warrior as long as you're Gaishain.
My favorite line of what you read is the almost dead yesterday, maybe dead tomorrow, but alive, gloriously alive today. Having been in several of those situations, it is weird that the things that you find funny or moving or what have you, because you're like, well, shit, I'm alive, it's okay. I very vividly remember there was one time we had just rotated back off the line. We finally got to process what we had just been through, and somebody walked up to me and said, here, and handed me 2 cans, and they were tall cans of Heineken.
Okay.
And they were like room temperature Heineken. Right then, that was like the only thing in the world that it was like, I didn't know I wanted this, but right now, all I want is this shitty American room temperature beer. I'm going to drink this and I'm going to regret it, but I can drink it because I'm alive. And that's I'm okay, and that's why this is okay.
And not being dead is worth celebrating.
Every time.
If you have a little perspective, anyway.
Right, exactly. Yeah, or Pizza Hut or some, so we had those 2 Heinekens, and then I remember just sitting. They brought out a child's plastic pool, like those shitty Walmart pools.
Yeah.
And they brought that out, and they put like 4 inches of water in it, and we got to take our boots off and just stick our feet in about 4 inches of cool-ish water while drinking those Heinekens. And that was the only thing I wanted to do for that entire day, was just sit there. And it was like, this is why I'm alive, and this is telling me I'm alive, and it's okay. Soldiers will do weird shit after battles when they realize that they're alive and it's all good. Especially victorious soldiers.
That makes sense to me. Even though I don't have any perspective on that, it makes sense to me that you would just be happy to enjoy small things like 4 inches of lukewarm water while drinking a beer that's been baking in the sun, probably.
And you have to be coming off a crazy brain chemical high of adrenaline and just relief and so many emotions.
Your body really shuts down because it's fear and adrenaline, and then it all just stops, and you're like, okay, I don't need to be paranoid. I don't need to be panicked. I don't need to be afraid. And it used to be a school. It was a bombed out school. So I sat in the equivalent of a second grader's chair with my feet in a pool of 4 inches of semi-warm water with 2 Heinekens and just sort of processed what I had been through that day.
I wanted to parrot Zarth, another vet in our Discord here, that he said earlier, especially when you have to digest the guilt, which is another thing I can only sort of try to imagine and grapple with.
In the moment, it's fine because it's you or them, and you don't want it to be you. But afterwards, it's a lot of processing of, oh, I did that thing. And I'm sitting here celebrating because I made sure that several others were not.
Couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Survivor guilt is a thing.
Sarah said, you made it, they didn't.
That's a tough thing to talk about and a tough thing to...
Yeah, I don't want to shine too much of a light on anyone without them saying that they want a light shined on them.
Right.
It's this scene is actually, and you can tell. I mean, it's come up before that RJ was a vet, and you can tell it in his writing. And this is very true to what you would see. You're going to have groups of people when you get a bunch of soldiers together after a battle and they survive. You're going to have those that get drunk and they party. And I remember oddly, because it's weird the small things you remember. While I'm sitting in that pool drinking those lukewarm beers and sort of getting through the survivor guilt, someone had a Britney Spears CD on, and it was very loud, and there were a bunch of people just dancing and partying.
So wildly inappropriate.
Well, and it's some people, that's how they processed. They did the dancing, they did the getting drunk, and all right, we did it, we're cool, and they got it out that way. And then there was the group of us that kind of slunk off into the corner and was like, okay, I survived. And now I get to do this shit again tomorrow. But for today, people process this sort of thing in completely different ways. So it's sort of showing the dichotomy here, because Matt has his own pile of things that he's dealing with, but he's sort of representing everyone with the survivor's guilt and not necessarily celebrating. And then it's very obviously showing everybody else who's, freaking out and getting drunk and partying and having an all good time.
Yeah, gosh. I was just pausing because it makes me wonder how I would do in that situation. No idea.
What do you think about the unifying of the three forces? The way the Kyrian and the Tyrans and the Aiel are sort of sharing Usquai, as they say.
There's some interesting bits there, and my immediate reflection, as soon as I read some of those lines, was that, the Terrans and the Kyrianans even are hanging out, and the Wetlanders are mingling with the Aiel, but they all just went through this thing together, returned to camp, and it doesn't matter anymore that, 20 years ago, the Aielmen were at war with the Terrans and the Kyrianen, and maybe 20 years before that, the Kyrianen were at war with the Terrans, and, well, in this situation, they all mutually defended each other and survived the day, and the past doesn't matter so much when you're given that new, immediate is the word I keep wanting to say, perspective. The arguments of your fathers don't matter very much when you all just defended each other and survived the day. Who cares what happened 20 years ago? Any one of you might not have made it back. Stray arrow, who knows?
Yeah, it doesn't really go into it, but there could have been, maybe there was a unit of Kyrianen that got saved because a unit of Tyran showed up, and they were like, all right, yeah, kind of like you said, battle forges new bonds that are different for people to comprehend, and it really does. It transcends national borders, it transcends gender borders. It doesn't matter. You and I were in this one place together. We both went through shit. We came out through the other side. You and me are connected now. We're cool. I don't care what else happens. This is a thing.
I remember my buddy, who I'm glad I referred to as his trail name, kind of going off a little bit in private when we were going through some places in the South, and there, you hang out in a bar in some of these really rural towns, and you might hear people saying things that are not very nice about, they're either racist or religionist, if that's a word. If it isn't, I'm making it up, and you know what I mean. And he would get really upset, and I think because he had just served with a bunch of, Latino and black dudes in the Middle East in various places, and he would get really upset. And I feel like that whenever I reflected on that, I always kind of thought, whatever kind of latent racism that's left in all of us just from living in the world was kind of burned away in this kid because a bunch of his battle brothers, to steal your guys' term, I see in the Discord here, were not whatever he was, which was a white Protestant kid from a Irish family in the Northeast United States somewhere, and he just sees them. I remember him repeating that, it doesn't matter. They were Marines. Nothing else matters. or nothing mattered to him in
Right.
that moment. And he had just returned. This was kind of his plan to decompress and spend some time in the woods and not have to go back and go get some office job, you know, like right after he just returned from war. I couldn't imagine trying to behave normally like a few weeks later, you know? How could you?
It's not easy. Like I, when I came, like I was saying yesterday, when I came back that one time, one of my times, just walking through downtown Seattle was hard because there were people and there were windows, and I was used to being in a place where behind every window was somebody with a muzzle pointed at my head. And so I didn't take the time to decompress that particular time, and that was a mistake. I ended up basically holing up in a hotel room for 2 weeks and not leaving because I just needed space to figure my shit out, to realize that I was not over there anymore. I am ex-Navy, so I have my own thoughts about Marines, but I will give him credit for knowing that going out into the woods and not dealing with people is a good idea for him. I won't bash the Marines on the podcast too badly.
And we love all of you.
Agonor, we need to keep religion off the podcast, please, with the the Marines versus the Navy. I'm sure is a little
that'll get you some hate mail. So let's avoid the hate mail.
Articles of faith there about who's better.
There's a bit of that. Is it too much of a tangent to ask about the rivalry there? Probably not. I think we'll blow through this chapter probably anyway. Because the Marines are part of the Navy, right?
Yes. So when it comes to the Marines and the Navy, there is intense rivalry. The Navy, the squids, us, would always remind the Marines, hey, remember, you guys are part of the Department of the Navy. And the Marines' response was always, yeah, the men's department.
Oh, God.
We always say things like Navy stands for never again volunteer yourself. Marine stands for my ass rides in Navy equipment. It's just because we're combined, right? Like, the Navy's job is to get the Marines to the fight. It's the Marines' job to eat the crayons and run into the machine guns for us, so then we can walk in afterwards and fix
who else
everything.
is going to eat the crayons? You show some
and the
respect.
purple ones are best because the purple ones taste best. That's what every Marine tells me. But to be fair, we also did things to them. Like I had a very brief stint on a Gator, the one of the amphibious ships that the Marines board in, and they're basically just troop transports.
Cool.
And if you imagine. So basically, like the open bay barrack that you see in like Full Metal Jacket is pretty much the way the Marines live on this boat for weeks at a time. And they have these stand-up lockers that they put their gear in. Well, the stand-up lockers are closed and zip-tied when the ship is in port and there are no Marines embarked. Well, squids are assholes. So for with a couple of them, we unclipped the zip tie. We put a brown paper lunch sack of dog doo-doo in the locker, closed it, re-zip tied it, and then fast forward 3.5-4 months to when the Marines on board. And they're tired, they're hungry, they don't want to deal with this shit. They show up in the lockers, they unclip the locker, they open the locker to load their stuff in, and they just get the whoosh of about 4-month-old dog shit.
And yes, guys, this is real life. And for no reason, I assume.
Because they were Marines, obviously.
Did they offer some insult, or they were just Marines?
They were Marines. That's all that needed to be.
Well, I'm amused, but that's, I'm sure, the 13-year-old boy in me. Oh, I was just going to say, I'm kind of glad you brought it up, Seth, because this is, John has some fun some fun stories about rivalries like that, and we're just talking about rivalries between the various American armed forces, but these are the armed forces of various nations, if we can call the Aiel nation a nation. I'm not sure that I would call it that.
There's going to be even less trust here because these people have actually fought each other and killed each other in many cases. And with the Aiel and the Kyrian, a lot of each other.
In some cases, there are veterans of the Aiel War, or what do the Aiel call it? I forget.
Layman's punishment or something, right?
But yeah, the Aiel didn't even view it as a war. They said this isn't a war. There was someone that did a crime who needed to be executed. Some people tried to stop us. They're dead. That's their view of the Aiel War.
Don't protect a criminal. That's really what it boils down to.
The whole point of me saying this is to say that I'm not sure if it's specifically mentioned, but it's highly likely that there are veterans of those wars between Kyrian and Tyr, and between Tyr and Kyrian and the Aiel mass, because I'm hesitating to call it a nation. There are many groups who govern themselves inside of it, so I don't know.
Clans.
Yeah, but my point is just that there are men who are fighting here now who remember literally facing the other side that they are now fighting shoulder to shoulder with. And so that's saying something. But also, can we call the Aiel Waste a nation? All right, Google. Define nation.
I think Rand is forming them into one.
I think you're right. I think they're not currently. Here, this is interesting. Webster's defines the word nation as a large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, language, inhabiting a particularly country or territory. So that's super vague. Then the Aiel are certainly a nation.
Yeah.
But I would say that you have to be a bit more organized. Like, you have to have some kind of, like, federal government or some sort of equivalent to be called an organized... I feel in order to call it a nation, it has to be governed by a one government. Can you just throw a few groups of people who, eventually interbreed into what's otherwise a vacuum, so a place where no one else lives, and are they a nation even if they war amongst themselves constantly and don't follow each other's laws? Or, I mean, I guess the Aiel do have some rules that govern everyone, but...
I would say they might be a cultural nation, but they're not a political nation. Rand brings the politics into it and makes them politically unified, whereas before they're just culturally unified.
I think it's a good point, and they do have common laws. I'm parroting you, Findar, in there. They do have common laws, which seem to be...
The wise ones regulate those.
Well, yeah, overseen by the wise ones who use clan chiefs and the men underneath them to enforce those laws if necessary. But it should not be, which is very much a part of their culture.
And that results from basically anyone who didn't obey the wise ones dying out, because it was like, you must come and make this pact to send your clan chiefs through the doorway, or you're dead.
And if you do not, you can leave, which is a death sentence.
Exactly. So there are certain things where the wise ones will interfere and the clan chiefs will listen, mostly to do with dreams. Wise one, what do they say? Women's circle business?
Right, so wise ones are kind of the quiet bureaucracy. And we see in this chapter, I believe it's this chapter, that the 4 clans that hadn't turned... hadn't followed Rand until now, got together, apparently decided that they were going to give their allegiance to Rand's side once the battle was basically complete. And then the 4 clan chiefs sit with the wise ones for hours and hours and hours, perhaps an entire day, and I mean 24 hours, not like the amount of time a normal person's awake. And Rand keeps saying, like, where are the chiefs? Like, I need to speak with them. I need to understand what their intent is. And everyone keeps saying to him, yeah, you can talk to them when the wise ones are done.
The Karakarn is not a king.
So, like, you might be the king of kings, right. But in order for you to be the king of kings, the wise ones have to say that these guys are kings. Otherwise, you're not the king of anything. You are the king of what the wise ones say you are the king of. And if they don't like it, then nothing is going to happen, much in the way things can happen in our government, where, you can elect a head of the federal government and he or she can yell all sorts of crazy stuff. But for something to actually happen, there are judges and academics and lawyers and all sorts of people who this has to go through first, because one man can't do anything alone.
Right. And in the case of the Aiel, that sort of common thread you have is the wise ones. Even though these clans have constantly been bickering and raiding and whatever back and forth, the wise ones are always off limits. And so that allows that sort of thread of communication. In this case, the four clans are able to basically show up and be like, hey, we're here to talk. And so I always got the feeling with this scene that it was a lot like those sort of the negotiation scenes you see in like World War II, where the generals are sitting across from the table and they're basically just passing info back and forth, and they're essentially coming to an agreement of, okay, this is what we need to decide that he is the Karakarn. They're like, okay, well, we don't want to give you that, but how about this? And so the whole thing that he's missing, I mean, that could be wrong, but in my headcanon, I just feel like it's this giant negotiation scene of what can we give you and what do you want in exchange for this, so that we can acknowledge him, so that we can all move on. And he's getting impatient because he doesn't understand that this is politics, and this is clan politics at best, which means that there's going to be a lot of individual things that you need to address, and there's a lot of individual points that need to be, a lot of certain people need to be basically have the equivalent of having their egos assuaged enough to where they'll agree to do the thing so that you can get the answer you want, so you can move on with what you're actually trying to get done.
Sure. And we see a great example of that when Rand's first couple of clans get together underneath him. Some of them have had blood feuds with each other for generations of their time, and they were very brave, the leaders of those groups who, swallowed their pride and didn't try to murder their historic enemies in the night in order to follow basically is like a religious figure almost. And I would imagine that more of that's happening now. Like, these clan chiefs show up and the wise ones pull them aside and say, hey, we're so glad you joined, but if any of the Black Eyes' throats get slit in the middle of the night, we're going to know who it was.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of, we're all going to behave like humans and adults. We're going to talk this shit out. Nobody leaves until we figure this out, which is why it takes so long, because someone was probably like, oh, I want this. And they're like, okay, so they want to reach an agreement, and they're basically filibustering until everybody is in agreement so that they can move on.
You can imagine, for that, like, listen, we'll join your big effort, but I'm the chief of my clan. You don't tell me what to do with my people. You may make a suggestion. I feel like a lot of things like that are happening. You may make a suggestion and I might follow your orders, but this is my clan, from my people, from my land.
Exactly. And it's the minutia that everyone is concerned with that you have to sort of address, which is why these things take forever. Because you can, yes, he might be the Karakarn. Okay, everybody agrees. Great. But now you have to, okay, but this clan is warring with this clan. Right. This clan is warring with this clan, so we need to make sure these two clans are appeased so they don't fight, so that they'll both join with the Karakarn. I feel like there's a lot of just boring minutia of trying to figure things out, which I'm almost glad we don't get to see. I'm glad that they're like, nah, you don't want to be a part of that, because I don't necessarily know that I would want to sit in on a 24-hour
You ever watch CNN at yeah, exactly. You ever watch C-SPAN at 2 o'clock in the morning? It's that. It's a recording of a bunch of senators making speeches about how they feel. And it's like, okay, man, we could have guessed how you felt.
And they're all saying the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, the 3-hour explanation. But you have to give people that. You have to show them that they're respected if you're going to lead a big contingent of different groups of people like this. Oh, and I almost forgot. I wanted to parrot what Fendarin said again here, that the Aiel are more like the states before there was a constitution, which is an interesting point, and it's pretty accurate, because way back, before there was a very strong federal government, the states went to war with each other. A lot of people don't know that, but it happened several times. over trade, over where the boundary is, over this, that, or the other thing, all kinds of stuff. The states would fight each other, do real combat. People died.
It was never huge, but it was enough. It was, there were declarations of war.
Yeah.
The people of Massachusetts decided that the people of Pennsylvania had pissed them off, and that was going to be a thing. And there wasn't a whole lot of upper echelon. There was no judicial or executive level of wise ones to be like, yeah, no, we shouldn't be doing this, because this is dumb.
They passed laws in an unfair way, and they're undercutting our whiskey business or our Usquai business, and same thing. That's a good parallel. Before people called themselves American, they called themselves Virginian or New Jerseyan or a New Yorker or something.
Yep, the Pennsylvanians were Pennsylvanians first. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Or an Oregonian. Wait, no, that doesn't.
Oregon wasn't really a state until like after the Civil War. Stuff was pretty locked in by then. It took a while to walk out here, It takes a while.
Right. Those first 100 years, we were still trying to figure out how to get out to this place.
Yeah, well, there were other nations in the way. That's a story for a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, what happened to those nations? Where did they go?
War.
Fun times.
It's this little nasty thing called Manifest Destiny.
Do you ever think about just how often Jordan slams the fact that women in a circle have power in his universe? The women's circle, women literally, Aes Sedai in a circle of power linked. The wise ones, the way they're sort of linked and controlling the clans in like at least a communication circle.
Well, I have at least a bit, and I always kind of saw this as, when you read history, even like 50, 60 years ago and back, you gotta wonder sometimes, particularly with European history, which I'm most familiar with. So there are these extremely powerful men whose word is law up until like just maybe 200 years ago, whose word is literally law. These are sort of like tribes, where if you could say England is a tribe, and Russia is a tribe, and Germany is a tribe, you could have said this really at the time, like just in like World War I and just last century, that, when the war was about to break out, these guys were writing each other, and sometimes their wives were writing the other kings or czars or whatever you want to call them, wives, to say, hey, talk to your husband. We need to make sure that this doesn't come to blows, because if it does, then someone's going to come to our aid and someone's going to come to your aid. So my dear cousin Nikki, Tsar Nicholas, which that's something I bring up a lot, but this is how they were actually writing to each other. My dear cousin Nikki, please temper your armies. Make sure we must, remain calm during this time. Otherwise, this could get real bad. And these letters still exist. These are like a tribe, and the clan chiefs and wise ones know each other. They drink together. They hang out with each other. And oftentimes married to each other's families. But they have to follow through with their nation's prerogatives, which, in the case of Germany was, well, we're more or less landlocked, and we have a enemy to either side of us, and one is Russia. So that's like most of the sides of the country. And if we don't attack first, then we just give our enemies a chance to arm themselves and then attack us from both sides. So we had better be fast if we're going to get out of this alive. And that was kind of the justification. I'm tangenting, but I was meaning to just highlight the kind of clan-like nature that all politics really is. I mean, Republicans and Democrats. I wish I could think of some other examples. Like European nations have basically the same kind of breakdown: conservatives and liberals. You could call that tribalism.
I did a report about World War I years ago about how it was basically just a family squabble that killed, 15 million people, because all of the leaders were related to each other.
Literally,
and that's not quite what they were all like cousins and stuff. But Yeah, it's the thing that, I mean, we have the benefit of foresight, hindsight, whatever, so we know what's going to end up happening. But at this time, the Aiel have no freaking clue. This has never happened before. They've talked about it for generations. There's always been kind of a what if, but it's once the what if becomes, reality, then you're like, oh crap, now what? Now we actually have to confront these things and go through with it and decide whether or not the thing we've been saying is actually going to be what we do.
And, in that era, these tribes were armed with weapons that no one had fought a war with yet. So you get those first couple of years of World War I where everyone talks about how men sprinting toward a machine gun or whatever, which was it just wasn't understood how to combat these weapons yet.
Yeah, the technology had outpaced the tactics. The tactics were still back in the Crimean phase of battle, when you still had lines of men marching.
Yeah.
But now, instead of having single-shot rifles and having volleys, you had one guy in a small mud pit who could take out 50 guys at a shot. And you had artillery that could reach 100 miles back and interfere with logistics or supply lines.
Yeah, the Paris gun was so tall they said it needed cranes to hold it in place.
Yeah, or Big Bertha, yeah. And then you have things like freaking airplanes, like
for the very
now
first
there's
time.
things that can fly. What the fuck? Like
fascinating stuff.
There are
certainly a lot of parallels in
WoD
where this new technology is being developed while these various clans get together and form what might be called a nation, like Germany, for instance, which wasn't a nation until I think after the American Civil War. A lot of people don't realize it was that recent. Before that, it was a bunch of princedoms, a bunch of small kingdoms.
Prussia, with the Holy Roman Empire collapsed, and then it was a bunch of individuals, fiefdoms, and then finally somebody was like, we might as well just be a thing.
More or less.
I mean, it's that's really painting with a broad brush, but
well, if I ever get the gumption and time and energy to make that history podcast, I'd like to talk about this stuff forever.
Oh, totally.
Super fascinating things.
That'd be a lot of fun.
We should come off this tangent because I kind of want to read to you guys. Matt's standing around, not really wanting to get drunk because he's nervous, I assume. Just came out of battle. He doesn't want to be messed up,
I also took it as he was going to try and make it. I always took it as he was going to try and make another break for it, and he didn't want to be drunk and not able to think straight.
And he is still thinking along those lines.
Get out of there. So he didn't dare get drunk, because if he gets drunk, he knows he's not leaving, and damn it, he needs to leave. and the pattern's basically like, nah, like that's cute. Sit back down.
So the celebration is going on around Matt. This is where we left off. And he's thinking about saddling his horse and leaving. This is done. He saved the Terrans. It's all over. And he sits, he's kind of thinking, and the hero should not sit without drinking. Startled, he jerked around, grunting at the stab of his wounds, to stare at Melindra. She had a large clay pitcher in one hand, not spears, and her face was not veiled, but her eyes seemed to be weighing him. Now listen, Melindra, I can explain everything. What must be explained? She asked, flinging her free arm around his shoulders. Even with the sudden jolt, he tried to stand straighter. He was still not used to having to look up at a woman. I knew you would seek your own honor. The Karakarn casts a great shadow, but no man wishes to spend his life in the shade. Closing his mouth hurriedly, he managed to faint. Of course. Okay, she was not trying to kill him. That's it exactly. In his relief, he took the pitcher from her, but his gulp turned into a splutter. It was the rawest double-distilled brandy he had ever tasted. She retrieved the pitcher long enough to take a draw, then sighed gratefully and pushed it back at him. He was a man of much honor, Matt Cawthon. Better that you had captured him. But even by killing him, you have gained much G. It was well you sought him out. Despite himself, Matt looked at what he had been avoiding and shivered. A leather cord tied in short, flame-red hair held Couldon's head. Atop the 10-foot pole, near where the Aielmen were dancing. The thing seemed to be grinning at him. Sought Cooladin out. He had done his best to keep the pikes between him and any of the Shaido, but that arrow had clipped the side of his head, and he was on the ground before he knew it, struggling to get to his feet with the fight raging all around him, laying about him with a raven-marked spear, trying to make it back to Pips. Cooladin had appeared as if springing out of air, veiled for killing, but there had been no mistaking those bare arms, entwined with dragons glittering gold and red. The man had been cutting a swath into the pikemen with his spears, shouting for Rand to show himself, shouting that he was the true Karakarn. Maybe he really believed it by then. Matt still did not know whether Cooladin had recognized him, but it had made no difference. Not when the fellow decided to carve a hole through him to find Rand. He did not know who had cut off Cooladin's head afterward, either. I was too busy trying to stay alive to watch, he thought sourly, and hoping he would not bleed to death. Back in the Two Rivers, he had been as fine a hand with a quarterstaff as anyone, and a quarterstaff was not so different from a spear, but Cooladin must have been born with the things in his hands. Of course, that skill had not availed the man much in the end.
Do you think Melindra's liquoring him up to get information out of him as a dark friend?
Think of the glory, Matrim Cawthon. Yeah, basically. I think Melindra would probably do whatever it took as far as her orders go. I think that she also does really like Matt. I think a lot of Aiel women would probably like Matt. He's a great warrior. He's a great general. And he's not half bad to hang around with. I mean, decent dude, you know? I think Melindra, again, will do what it takes to get Matt to think of the glory.
I also think she's a plant to turn Rand against Samael, because
Melindra?
Remember, the meeting was, because she's got that golden bee dagger that she's going to try and kill him with.
Uh-huh.
And remember, the plan in the beginning was to get Rand to go after Samael and have them all the Forsaken there in a circle, ready to take him down.
Right.
And I'm willing to bet that all the Forsaken were in a circle, giving him the power to attack during the battle. That line of lightning that took down the tower, totally not just Samael. I bet it was Samael and the other three that were in the, I don't know what you want to call it, Forsaken Social.
I wouldn't be terribly surprised.
Because they waited for him to get tired, and then they came after him with everything.
With Saidin.
Mm-hmm.
One of the men is leading the circle, so it's either Ravine or Samael. I don't see who else it could be at this point. That either led a circle or attacked by themselves. That is also possible, although I doubt it, because none of them wants to die. And from what I know about fighting like this, like, it doesn't really matter how great of a, say, swordsman you are. The dumbest kid in the world could run up behind you and swing with all his might and cut you right in half. It doesn't take training to do that. It does take training to face someone face to face, to really fence like that. That's hard. But just to hit somebody, that doesn't take skill. So it could have been won.
As someone once said, just sticking them with the pointy end, not that hard. It's getting the pointy end to them.
Right, getting the pointy end to them and then removing yourself from the danger afterward.
But, all it takes is someone inexperienced doing something unexpected.
Which is why initially I even said to John last night that I want to think this is one of the Forsaken, but is it possible that this is just like a Dreadlord that's one of the Forsaken is in charge of? Why not? I mean, It could be literally anyone. All Rand knows is that a lightning bolt that involved Saidin came near him. That's all he knows.
And it was a powerful channeler to produce that kind of, or someone with an Angreal.
Yeah, probably close to as powerful as himself. Close.
Not quite there, though.
Well, nobody is.
Never quite there, are you, Samuel? And that's why he turned to the dark side.
Matt's thinking of how to get rid of Melindra so he could saddle Pips when Talmanis presented himself with a formal bow, hand to heart, in the Kyrianan fashion. Grace favor you, Matt. And you, Matt said absently. A delegation came from the city during the night. There will be a triumphal procession for the Lord Dragon, in gratitude from Kyrian. Will there? Matt says. He does not care at all.
He's so focused on how to get rid of Melindra that he's like, he's talking words, he's in the conversation, but his brain is totally somewhere else. He's like, Will there, she had to have duties of some sort. The maidens were always flocking her. Like, it's like, and then like...
He's waiting for her to look away
on...
so he can disappear. He, for some reason, is afraid the woman will come after him when no one else will. I don't think that she would.
He doesn't know she's a dark friend right now, right? So he just thinks that she's being a little overzealous friendly.
Yeah.
He's commitment phobic to the hilt currently, so he's trying to avoid any and all entanglements.
Yes, he's afraid of settling in and being happy.
Right, exactly. And so he doesn't realize that she's pursuing him for orders, not because she's trying to bed him and wed him.
She's trying to bed him and stab him.
What is with Matt and women getting women into bed who want to poke them with knives? This one, a certain
wrong time,
Queen
wrong
of
place,
Ebudar.
wrong being to Varen and fighting against the Dark One.
Even Tuon is all about stabbing people with knives.
I'm telling you, charisma is not a dump stat. Poor Matt, when he rolled his character, he is like, all his Taviran is in his charisma. And that backfires.
Ooh, pretty girl wants to hang out. Yeah, sure. Tries to stab him. Ooh, pretty girl wants to hang out. Come on, man. Vet a little. This is what dating is for.
Ooh, pretty girl I don't want to hang out with. Tries to stab him.
He really can't win.
Hang out a bit and get to know each other before you move in with each other, so this doesn't happen, man.
Pretty girl sees him lying sick in barn. Tries to stab him.
That his Taviran really screwed him over.
When it comes to women with knives, yeah,
he's just a beacon in the night for all the women that want to stab a guy. They're all the potential Randland serial killers out there. They're just all flocking to him for some reason.
I mean, there's a whole period of time where he's hunted by like the Dark Friends coming out of Tarvalin before he finally escapes them. Where just everyone's coming out of the night being like, haha, I'm trying to stab you. And he's like, why does everyone want to rob me? I'm not, wow. A lot of street crime in this place. I guess I'm just a small town guy. I didn't realize.
Jeez, I'm just trying to go home and milk my dog's cows.
What is the joke about, the universe hates you? The pattern really doesn't like Matt. The pattern is definitely having a joke at Matt's expense. Yeah. And is enjoying it.
The pattern says, you think you're funny, Matt? Check this out. This delegation thing is happening. And this I kind of wanted to ask some questions about because there's probably some deep stuff here. We have Talmanis and a man named Mylon. Is that right? There's a lot of different names here. A delegation came from the city during the night. There will be a triumphal procession for the Lord Dragon. Lord Dobrain, Lord Marengil, and Lady Colavir, among others, also came to the Lord Dragon, which means that each one is trying to angle for some other thing, probably.
This is Game of Houses to the hilt. This is, I need to get in front so that I'm the one that presents the idea before the others so that I can get the thing, so that they don't get the thing.
Yeah. Everyone's trying to be the one who organized the victory procession for Rand.
Exactly.
And Matt's first instinct is, so what does it matter who sent a delegation as long as Rand gets his procession? It matters that you should ask him for our rightful place at the head, Talmanis said quickly. You slew Couladin and earned us that place. So this is Talmanis trying to angle Matt to get ahead of Dobrain, Marengil, and Colavir to tell the dragon he wants to lead a procession through Cairhien, with him leading it because he is the champion of the army, which means also that Matt's men will be at the front with him.
Trickle-down glory. We're in the presence of, we fought with Matt, so therefore we earned the glory, so therefore my house will look good, so therefore so-and-so's house will not look good, and it's all...
Yeah.
It's so Cairhien and it hurts.
Well, and Matt should have the honor because he killed the enemy general, right? He's the one who took down...
Legitimately, yes. Yes, he did.
Talmanis gives him that reason, but then Matt's just like, yeah, all right, if it's important, then go ahead. You just go ask him. It's none of my affair. And they're like, God damn it. Because they want to be at the front of the damn parade. That's basically, I see what this is about. And, of course, in Kyrianan society, this is like how you gain honor and political coin, for lack of a better word, that you can later spend. That you rode at the head of the procession of the victory against the evil Aiel, that the Lord Dragon, you are his big special man, aren't you? It's all very goofy, but it's what it is.
I like this line. Talmanis and Nalcian gaped at him as if he were demented. And it's like, no, you outrank us. You go ask. We're telling you to go ask. This is how this works. We tell you, you tell him, we get the glory. Like,
and that's maybe a bit of a, like, first of all, we don't say shit to the dragon. Like, he's a great emperor of many nations. You are his friend. You talk to him. You're one of his generals, and that's the way these men see it. You're one of his generals. You can talk to him. Who am I to walk into this guy's tent and start telling him what he's going to do? But come on.
Right.
And just a quick sentence on the nobles. Milan and Meringil are also competing with Colover for the Sun Throne. They end up assassinated by Colover in the streets before she takes the Sun Throne during Dumai's Wells. And then she hangs herself after Rhaengar comes back and takes the crown from her. So the only one to come out of this group alive is Dobrain. He ends up being stabbed and helps the King of Tyr. He's sort of, we know Dobrain, he's pretty major minor character.
Yeah.
You want to call him the tertiary, not...
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. He's not a major character. He's not a minor character.
Yeah,
he's like
tertiary is a good character.
Yeah.
And then I like the next part where Talmanis is like, my body servant will polish your boots. And then, Nalcian is like, and mine will brush and mend your clothes. And they're just like, they're trying to one-up each other in front of him. And his brain is so not even there. He's just like...
That's like, what are you talking about? I'm fine. I'll just wear dirty boots. Who cares? Yeah, I enjoyed that too. Because, and these two men, currently, are trying to angle basically to be as close to Matt, to be as indispensable to him as they possibly can. So they're going to lend whatever resources they can to him to make his life nicer, so that he, in turn, likes them and wants to keep them around. I that's what I see.
Good things roll downhill is the idea.
If you're very close to power.
I will help elevate you, you will gift me with something later when I ask for it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you're the Lord Dragon's favored general's favored assistant, you are high up there in the world. You have all sorts of power. People will be afraid of you just because of who you're associated with. And that's, I feel, the way the Kyrianan are looking at it. And Matt's just like, who, Rand? He's barely suited to shovel up the sheep poop. Like, don't worry about him. But nobody else sees it that way.
Yeah. And the next sentence where he's, General, Matt exclaimed, holding himself up with the spear haft, I'm no flaming... I mean, I wouldn't want to usurp your place. Let them figure out which one of them he meant. He's getting a little bit of enjoyment out of trying to... He's fucking with them.
He's Aes Sedaiing them.
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt was not sure whether to laugh hysterically or sit down and cry. his thought at the end of that. It's like, these people are treating me like a lord. Oh God, am I a lord? Oh God, what has happened to me? All I wanted to do was drink and hang out with pretty girls.
And you notice, and burn my soul, we need a banner. Your banner. At that, the Kyrianan nodded emphatically. The birth of the Band of the Red Hand.
Yeah, they spend about another page just being like, I'll get you a horse and we'll groom you, and I've got a great coat that you can wear. And the whole time, it's sort of only mentioned every so often, but Melindra's giving him a massage or something, because every so often it'll be like he'll feel her fingers on the back of his neck, and it goes from like massaging to poking, and I think it's because she's reacting to all of this stuff that's going on. while he's talking.
I can see that. She's changing what she's doing, but she wants Matt to accept this, to accept his new high status. She wants him to grab it, take it, be, gosh, a dark friend. Ambitious. But
selfish.
Of the three boys, not to mention the women who are, maybe even better suited, but of the three Taveran boys, none of them they don't really have much ambition at all. They will do what is necessary, but even Rand, even now, I feel like still kind of sees it as a day's work. Like, yeah, it's rough. Yeah, you have to shovel up all the cow poop and all the, things no one wants to do at a farm, but the only way to make it function, the only way to make this larger operation function is to do these dirty deeds, like shoveling poop. And so the boys are more than willing to do that. They're more than tempered to their hard workers. They care about living in a decent society. They, care about justice and things like that. But when you get down to it, they have a very simple way of viewing things, which makes them really great heroes in a story where, they're not interested in, I don't want fame. I don't even really want or need money. We could go home and live a nice life there.
So let me turn that on its head. What would a dark friend Matt look like who was seeking power and money and fame and glory, but was still a Taveran and still had all the same luck?
He would be playing the game of houses hardcore right now, and he would be acknowledging that he was the general, and he would be, okay, we're going to be at the front of that procession. I'm going to need this sort of armor. I want to be this visible. We're going to, he would be fingers deep in the pie of planning all this stuff, because he knows a dark friend Matt would know that the way into power is appearance. If you appear to have power, people will grant you the power that you appear to have, even if you don't actually have it.
Well, that's a true real world thing.
Absolutely. And the first step to that would be positioning himself in a position of power at the parade, and that could spiral off into all kinds of things.
My first instinct was to say, and by the way, fun question, Seth, but my first instinct was to say that I think Matt would be, and maybe this says something about me and John and our different answers, but that Matt would be seduced and fall into less than Christian life choices, like the women, the booze, the just carousing, and like taking whatever it is that he wants because he can. Hedonism, yes, Devico, but also I feel like to be truly evil in that situation, you have to have the idea that you deserve it, that you deserve to take from the world what you want because of what you do for it.
And what I see with Matt, what he could do is, say, walk into any bar and take anything he wants, and his luck is going to protect him and get him what he can essentially build up a massive power base. He has infinite money at his disposal. If he doesn't care, if he can take any amount of money from anybody, like walk into a bar, he doesn't just take a little bit from each game. He takes it all every time.
Yeah.
He builds up not just the Band of the Red Hand, but a massive army.
And why not use them for all sorts of other tasks? He could have a nation if he wants one.
Right, yeah. Once you have an army and you become essentially a superpower for hire, whoever he wants to be, whoever he feels could give him what he wants, he joins that particular side, even if it's only briefly, right? Like, sometimes it's just the appearance of, oh, did you hear Lord so-and-so now has the Band of the Red Hand under his employ? All right, well, screw it. I guess we're not going to try and do this thing because I don't want to lose to the Band of the Red Hand. So you don't even have to, winning a war without firing a shot kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he would be, Dark Friend Matt would be like the ultimate Mafia Don / like Julius Caesar type.
Who was kind of a Mafia Don, in my opinion.
Sort of.
I see Rand as a little more Julius Caesar.
A lot of those old Roman generals were, highly powered Mafia Dons, essentially. You get into this position, but the only way to get your, what did the Romans call it? It wasn't your honors, it was your It was a big parade.
Oh, the not victory parades, but
There's a special word for it.
there is, and it's right there. What the hell is it called? Triumphs.
Triumph.
The
You
triumphs.
get a triumph.
Yes.
Where you come home and you march your armies into Rome, and people are throwing confetti or whatever. I don't know. Who knows what they did back then? But it's a whole big deal, and you have pickled the head of the German general that you were fighting against, and you hold it up, and everybody cheers for you, and everybody remembers you for generations, and your face gets carved into whatever. That's what these men really wanted. Honors. Many of them. The more you could get, the more weight you had in society, the more power you had, the more likely you were to be elected to a position. And if you're elected to a position in the older Roman Senate, it meant that you were essentially a general. Once you're given that power, if you win and you get your triumph, then you're elected again. So created this vicious cycle of ambition. The more slaves you can bring back, the more gold you can bring back, the more valuable things you can enrich the other senators with, the more money they would give you to go out and back and do something better, bigger.
And you had to do something better and bigger, because if you didn't, and your opponent did, or your co-consul did, they would get elected again, and you wouldn't. And a lot of parallels can be drawn to the Age of Legends and the early Roman Empire, where you earned extra names if you had, great victories, and it was all about, how people perceived you and that sort of thing. And yeah, the vicious cycle of I need this for me. And once you start down that path, it's basically like a drug.
Once you got certain positions, you were essentially like unimpeachable. You couldn't be prosecuted or taken down unless someone was elected to take your position. And if you were no longer had that position, then you were open to what we would call these days prosecution. And what they called that back then was execution.
Yeah.
So if you broke laws to win those great triumphs, that's great and all, and the common people might not understand, but everyone else, like the academics in the world, understood what you just did, and they're just waiting for you to not be in power anymore. And once you're not in power, once you don't have that title, they can take you out, literally. And there's not much that can be done, especially if you can prove it, that this person did bad things and that's why he had to be executed. It is a bit like being a president of the United States. I'm not sure how it works in other places, but it's hard to prosecute a president. It's very difficult. There's a lot of laws protecting that. But once you're not a president, and you were, and you made presidential mistakes or misdeeds, you can be prosecuted once you're not the president anymore, quite easily.
Unless Ford
Pardons
you. That son of a bitch.
That's there's a trick to that. Yeah. If the next president is willing to pardon you, then you can't be prosecuted.
Federally. State's another issue.
That's
That's another story.
The clans can do whatever the states can do whatever they like if you're on their land. But if you don't go to their land, then, well, there's not much they can do. Does anybody remember when I think Vermont put out an arrest warrant on President Bush for like crimes against humanity, or I don't remember what it was, but they're just really disagreeing with the Iraq War, and they were like, if President Bush sets foot here, our police will arrest him, which, of course, is just a political move. What are you going to do, shoot all the Secret Service guys? Come on. Get in a fight with the federal government? Good luck.
Can you imagine that on the evening news? Local officials got into a firefight with federal agents attempting to arrest the president this afternoon.
We call that a civil war.
6 dead.
Yeah. No, that doesn't happen anymore. But it's bluster. It's saying, we don't want you. Like, we disagree with your actions so much that if you come to our land, you face this threat. You might pick that fight. So don't come to Vermont, President Bush. It was I feel like that's really what that means.
It's a very heavy-handed political statement.
Empowering in some ways, I feel like, for Vermonters. And I'm using Vermont, by the way. I don't remember the state that did this at the time. But I'm using Vermont because they often do things like that. federal government says something that they don't like, and they're like, "That's it. We're ceding. We're leaving the union." And they can't. They're not ever going to really do that, but they can threaten to. You can say whatever you want. Well, I have a bit more to read. Maybe this will put us back on track. I think I drove us far away from the point. We're back to Rand in this chapter. Avienda explains to Rand that Moraine healed him. And if you guys remember from the last chapter, at some point Rand was so exhausted when he was trying to give orders to the maidens, Sulin stopped listening to him, basically. He wasn't making sense anymore. He was so exhausted. And she just kind of said something like, "Oh, Rand, the wise ones need to speak with you now." And he was like, "Well, send a runner," and she was like, "Oh no, they need to speak with you right now." And he was like, "This better be short." And then he wakes up a day later. He showed up apparently, maybe passed out. He doesn't seem to have any memory of it. He was healed. He's waking up right now. And also, Egwene scolds him. Like, "Listen, you're a lot more powerful than us, and I don't understand what your limits are, but you push yourself way too hard. You could kill yourself." And Asmodean weighs in.
Did you guys talk at all in the last chapter about the amount of power he was pulling in and how the taint was probably causing the damage to his side at all?
Well, he's bleeding before he hits the ground when the tower goes over.
And I think that's from him pulling in lots and lots and lots of power and breaking open the seal on
But
his true power.
how we did talk about how he was bleeding. There's a part in the last chapter where after the tower comes down, he reaches down and is bleeding from his side, and he's like, "Well, shit, I can't let them see that, or they're going to be fawning all over me, and I don't have time for this."
Yeah. And that's, as we've established in previous episodes, because Rand is channeling so much of the power. He's not just channeling everything he can. He's channeling everything he can with the little fat man Angreal, which is
a lot of taint for a long time. Yeah. Because he is so powerful. He is so tired that he essentially lets the barrier between him and his current life and his past life fade away. And almost there for a second, you get a preview of Veins of Gold Rand. In my opinion.
Sort of, because you do right at the very end of the last chapter where he's talking about Samael, but he's using his real name, and Asmodean's there, and even Asmodean is like, "Oh, I never knew that guy's real name. Where the hell is this coming from?" Like, his face is all ashen, and he's just like, "What is going on? This is not okay."
But it's still Rand just using those memories like his own.
Oh, right, yeah. He's stream of consciousness talking.
I thought that Rand was so exhausted in those moments that he no longer can differentiate. He's just having thoughts. He doesn't have the critical ability to really inspect right now. He's so exhausted that he's just following what his mind's best decisions can be or do. If LTT comes up with a really good solution to a problem that he's having, he just does it because it's like they're his own thoughts, and he's so exhausted he can't differentiate.
Yeah, he's on total autopilot. And, if you've ever been there, like, you ever, like, driven home when you weren't trying to go home because you were on autopilot? Like,
John used that example last night. Yeah. You kind of, it's not like waking up quite, but you're pulling up to your house and you're like, "Oh, I'm here. I don't remember driving here, but okay."
And that's how I feel like if Rand never drove the route, but LTT drove it every day, Rand just goes on the route. He's like, "Wow, how did that happen? I don't know the route."
Following through
somehow
the
I got here. Yeah.
And I was going to say before, I kind of want to embrace the tangent here because I really want to ask the two of you. Okay, Rand is the most powerful channeler on the planet currently, at least, maybe ever. And he's using a relatively weak Angreal to help him channel sometimes. Now, what I really want to ask is, in a lot of my previous rereads, I had always seen an Angreal is like, okay, your attack is worth 6 points, and if you're holding this particular Angreal, it's worth a +1. If you're holding that particular Angreal, it's maybe worth a +3. But now I kind of see it maybe a little bit more like it's actually worth maybe about a +10%. So if you're very powerful, that 10% is worth a lot more, right? If your 100% is 100, that 10% is 110. That's awesome. If your 100% is 80, that plus 10% is 88. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I 110% agree.
Yeah, I think it's much more a percentage of how strong you are. Yeah,
That's sort of the way that I'm looking at it now. That it's like it's like a plus percentage bonus, and maybe if you're
it's a multiplier, not a hard number.
right, if you're holding a very powerful Angriel, it might be a plus 100%. But if you're extremely powerful to begin with, it's doubling something that was already very powerful. You're now operating at 200% of whatever your ability is. So if your ability is 1 and you're holding that Angriel, then you're now channeling 2. Which is big for you, but not maybe for Rand.
My only caveat to that is the really big ones. Maybe the difference is that something like a Sa'angreal rather than Angreal, it doesn't matter how much you can channel because your amount of channeling is insignificant compared to what they are able to pull in.
Even if a channeler like Soraleia, for instance, picks up the Choden Call, is she as powerful as Rand now, or is she as vastly powerful as we might imagine,
Now, I mean, one of the issues is a weak channeler can't pick up the Choden Call. They'll burn themselves out like that. So only a powerful channeler can pick it up, so it's a bit...
Oh, when Devico, I mean the key to the Choden Call, not the... Yeah, no one can, I don't think anyone can channel through the actual...
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the keys are for, and yes, I don't think you would... There's a lot of channelers who can't use the keys. They are just too weak.
It's intentionally vague. They are very much good plot points of now you're this powerful because I need you to be this powerful for the plot, and we're gonna have something in your pocket that lets you do that. Like I said last night, my rereads of these later books is not as up to date as my rereads of the earlier books. I see where you're going with that, and I think as a baseline I agree. But I don't. There's going to be exceptions to every rule. So, I think it's a multiplier increase as opposed to a set numerical value, if that's what you wanted to. So, as opposed to like a plus, instead of like a +1 dagger, like in D&D, it's an extra, I don't know, a couple of spell slots or whatever. Like I think it takes what you are putting into it and multiplies whatever you're putting into it or whatever you're capable of by X number of degrees based on whatever the which artifact you're using.
So, and if we want to put it in sound terms, which for some reason on a podcast I want to do, it's an amplifier. Literally, you put in a certain volume and it amplifies at a certain dB, and dB is basically a percentage, and then. It's more complicated than that. But anyway, it amplifies a certain dB, and what comes out the other end is dependent on what's in the first end, what goes in, and the power you're putting into the amplifier. The power of the amplifier.
Yeah.
And so, even a weak signal comes out way stronger on the other end. But I could see maybe if you have like a cutoff where like too weak of a signal doesn't trigger the amp to do anything.
Obscure, copied from the wiki... and the wiki's the wiki. Anyone can edit it. We all know this. But I think this is significant. While all Angriel offer this benefit, they do vary considerably in strength. The amount of additional power to which they provide access is dependent on both the Angriel's strength and the channeler's own strength and the power. The stronger a channeler, the more powerful an Angriel provides.
Proportional amplification, yeah.
That does sound a bit more like a percentage, or like... or multiplied by, 1.1, 1.7, or 100%, say, or more. I'm glad I brought it up. I thought this chapter was going to be really short, but I knew that with the three of us chatting, it would all take much more time. And that's good, because what else is the point of this podcast but to sit around with friends and talk about the Wheel of Time? That's the point.
What, really?
Yeah, that's all we do. I mean, basically. Produce the podcast, try to promote it, stuff like that. But otherwise, I mean, this is really what we wanted to do in the beginning, sit here and chat.
Just a side note, the person I'm working with who got me my job, reads the Wheel of Time. My roommate reads the Wheel of Time. You read the Wheel of Time. I can pretty much go through my entire day and talk about the Wheel of Time from when I get up until I go to bed. It's pretty great.
Not a bad day.
It is sort of amazing, though. I never get actually sick of talking about the Wheel of Time.
Well, because there's so many different factors, right? Like, I can focus on the military sides of things and be like, it's so cool because, like, you see realistic military formations and there's these cool tactics and things. You see cannons and black powder. Other people can be like, so there's these great political bits where it's essentially the War of the Roses, or it's, wars of succession between political houses in different countries. And then someone else can be like, oh, it's a great, hero's journey. You see the parabola of the hero's journey, and it follows from one point to the other. There's little bits of a lot of stuff for a lot of different people.
Jordan was such a voracious reader, and he put pieces of every book he read into this book. This is not one book. This is about 60 books layered on top of each other.
Absolutely.
Totally.
And there's so much good in it. If you like a love story, you got love stories. If you like battle scenes, you got battle scenes. If you like complicated magic systems, you got that. If you want fancy, beautiful
Culture.
erotica, you got to go somewhere else. That's something that this series just doesn't really have.
Thank you, Harriet.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Harriet. We didn't need that. It'd have been too much, probably.
Because Harriet tells the story of telling Jordan he had to take out the scenes because he was terrible at writing them.
I've heard several people tell me that. At some point, Harriet was like, you can't write sex scenes. And he was like, yes, ma'am. And
I've heard her say
they're
it.
not in there. Oh, yeah?
Yeah. No, I was at the this last Jordan Con at the
Maybe I did
Team
too.
Jordan.
I don't even remember where I heard that from. I just remember laughing about it and thinking, well, okay. I could see it. I mean,
She's great. I mean, I think she uses it as a laugh line frequently.
yeah, I immediately thought, could I write a really good sex scene? And I was like,
Yeah.
probably not. How do you? It's so complicated.
I mean, I think that's why we sort of had fun with the igloo sex scene, where like freaking afterwards, Avienda gets up and is like, "Never again," and Ray doesn't know what to do. And yeah, no, it's like because Jordan's not the greatest at writing them either. That was, it's a little awkward to talk about, but fun.
I thought that was awkward, but I kind of thought that was how Avienda might react, where she's awkward and bad in that situation because she,
hasn't thought about boys at all.
She's not sentimental. She doesn't really care that much about Rand's feelings as much as she cares about her own honor and how to defend, She's like, well, that's never happening again. It's like, damn, girl. You didn't got to say it like that. Like, I understand you have your reasons, but geez. Oh, gosh. Did everyone just agree that the sex scenes in Name of the Wind were cringy?
Yeah, I guess the second one, not.
Wise Men's Fear?
With the fairy goddess or whatever. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. That's what Discord's deciding. Yeah. It's like, ooh, that it took, that first book had so much promise and the second book still does, but it just didn't need that scene. It just, it negates, it makes it so that the narrator has to be putting you on or a bad person. And that's not really good, Wait,
why is the narrator a bad person?
Just the terrible sex scenes and the way he treats them. Like, it's just like how this person's just like kind of a dick to everybody around him, and like he's like this amazing good in bed like first time big, this incredible fairy. Yeah, I mean it's just this like what this is.
No one's fabulous
crap.
at anything the first time you do it. That's no.
Not to mention so fabulous that an immortal fairy who has seduced thousands of men to their deaths decides, wow, you're so good.
Oh yeah, this virgin teenage boy. That's all about.
Yeah,
this.
Totally.
No, no woman ever said that. Well, no adult woman ever said that.
And so I find that sticks in my head from that book, and it makes me. I can see why he's having trouble writing the third book, because it's hard to bring together the character I think he wants to write with the character that he has been writing.
I'm just appreciating that Fendarin just wrote, if she did, she lied. Nah, they're fine books, and I enjoyed reading them.
I am a voracious reader of fantasy. If they were something different, he's he's got a background in thermodynamics, so his magic system works on a thermodynamic level, which was very interesting. But I love this upcoming scene because it's a lot of Avienda still being Avienda, but every time she tries to do something, she gets undermined by Asmodean because he doesn't give a shit. She's like, Moraine healed you. She shouldn't have. And Asmodean's like, she's been in here twice already. Chill. She's fine. Stop trying to lay the guilt trip on.
And it's also they have different goals. Avienda wants him to take care of himself. Asmodean wants him to win.
Right.
And so she's saying she's trying to keep information from Rand in the way maidens do to basically protect him, to keep him from hurting himself, overexhausting himself. She is trying to protect Rand one way, and Asmodean is trying to protect himself by using Rand. It shows the huge contrast between the personalities.
Yeah, in a very similar way to how I was talking about Sulin, and there was one other high-ranking maiden, an older woman, that at some point grab Jayadine's reins. And me and John spent a moment on this last night, just talking about how Rand keeps trying to spur his horse, but the horse won't go anywhere, and Rand can't understand why, and he eventually looks down, and there's two women looking back up at him, holding the horse's reins. And they ask him some questions, and basic questions about what he's going to do, what his plan is, and he just can't really answer in like any kind of a way that's understandable. And he keeps saying, well, we need to find them. My people are down there, and this, that, and the other thing. And they're like, no, Rand, they're all back with the wise ones now. Do you want to see them? And he's like, well, I have to find them. Where are they? Aren't they down there in the battle somewhere? And he's going on, and they're like, eventually at some point, Sulin says, Rand, the wise ones need to talk to you now. And just kind of lays it, and Rand's like, oh gosh, well, I hope it's quick. And then he just wakes up the next morning, or really the following afternoon. He sleeps for like 16 hours or something. The way I'm seeing it, he's going to bed in like the late afternoon and waking up in like the late afternoon.
Right. And he wakes up and he finds that he's naked.
Yeah, that too.
Which is another way of being controlled, because he doesn't have his clothes on and he doesn't want to get up from the blanket because he's naked.
I know some of the Aiel understand that they can sort of manipulate him in that way, but a lot of the Aiel don't understand that why this is a thing that bothers him. He could just walk outside and no one would flinch or anything. I don't know. Do you think they're using that as a method of control? Or do you think they just kind of think it's funny? I know the maidens tease him sometimes that he's...
I think it's specifically Avienda who's doing it. She's like sitting on his clothes currently and he doesn't see it yet.
So because she knows that that's an added way to get him to not get up.
Right.
I was going to read next. Asmodean says, I understand that a man can kill or gentle himself doing what you did. Strengthen the power is useless if the body is exhausted. Saidin can easily kill us. The Saidin can easily kill if the body is exhausted. Or so I have heard. Are you finished sharing your wisdom, Jason Tail? Avienda's tone was chillier, if anything, and she did not wait for a reply before turning her gaze of blue-green ice back to Rand. The interruption, it seemed, was his fault. A man may behave like a fool sometimes, and little is worse for it, but a chief must be more than a man, and the chief of chiefs more still. You had no right to push yourself near to death. Egwene and I tried to make you come with us when we grew too tired to continue, but you would not listen. You may be as much stronger than we as Egwene claims, yet you are still flesh. You are the Kara Karn, not a new Sayadun seeking honor. You have obligation, to the Aiel, Rand al'Thor, and you cannot fulfill it dead. You cannot do everything yourself. I thought that was very significant, and I really wanted to read that, because Avienda is hitting on something that's going to play out over like the next 5 damn books, until Rand eventually does get it, that he can't do everything himself. He can't protect literally everyone who's in the last battle. He can't. He just cannot. And he must eventually delegate some of his responsibilities to other people who are more than capable of doing it. Almost want to read again, "You have toe to the Aiel, Rand al'Thor, and you cannot fulfill it dead." She's adamant.
Well, and this also comes back to what we were talking about last episode with the unreliable narrator, because the next line down is, "For a moment he could only gape at her. He had barely managed to do anything at all, had left the battle to others for all practical purposes, while stumbling about trying to be useful." We know that's not true, because we saw Matt, and they were basically hiding in a fold in the earth because there was so much goddamn lightning and fireballs and shit being splattered around.
And one time he was saved by lightning. It was the only thing that got him out of a bad situation.
Exactly, yeah. So we know that Rand was doing quite a bit, but in Rand's own head, he didn't think he was helping at all.
All he did was stand around and cast lightnings. He wasn't even down there with his men. And that seems to make him feel weird about it, which...
useless.
I want to say that on some levels I can understand it, and on other levels I totally understand the opposite. That... you kind of want to be down there with everyone doing the work. Otherwise, what are you? Some kind of a lord or something? You know? Who are you? And we see this in Matt's POV. We see this in Rand's and Perrin's POV. We see this, I feel like, with the women less. They seem to accept their responsibilities and roles a little better than the boys do. But they go through some similar struggles. And a lot of that is, is sitting at a desk somewhere and making orders that will kill people. And that is what needs to be done when you're a leader. And in the world that we live in and in the world that we're enjoying discussing, these are things, these are just facts. Sometimes you have to make a shitty decision where people die who might not have to. But you may have to do that, and I believe that's why the last chapter was called The Lesser Sadness, when Rand decides to kill everyone who's fighting for the gates of Cairhien, so that there is no one fighting over them anymore. Shitty. He probably killed a bunch of his own people, maybe 100 of them, maybe more. But now the Shaido are not in Cairhien. Digging them out, can you imagine how many more lives would be lost? Like, these are shitty. I can't think of a better adjective to describe the type of decision this is. This is really hard. You have to decide to kill some of your own people to save thousands, maybe 100,000 of them. How terrible.
And it was worth it.
And if you just do the math, it seems worth it. But if you just look at it morally and you limit yourself in that way, then all you can see is that you killed people. You're a murderer. You killed your own men for a reason.
Why does Avienda say he has toe to the Aiel people?
He's the Karakarn. He has obligation. Leaders are, I think, as much as many of us would like to fantasize about what it would be like to be the leader of a great nation, people rarely like to think about those sorts of terrible decisions I was just talking about and the awful burden of making those decisions. But also... if you are, and I'm going to come back to United States politics because it's the one politics I really understand.
Experience with, at least.
When you're the president of the United States, typically your day goes like an advisor walks into your bedroom at 5:30 in the morning, wakes your ass up. He gives you a copy of a couple of newspapers with highlights. So people were awake in the middle of the night, making sure that you read what was necessary to understand about today. That's how your day begins. You're woken up. You're required to read these things. Then you can maybe get up, take a shower, do a jog or something if that's what you're into. Then you have like meetings. All that happens to you all day long is your advisors tell you where you need to be, where you need to sit down, who you need to talk to, and what types of decisions you need to make. Basically, you don't have a life anymore. You don't make decisions about your own life. You make decisions about the 300 to 400 million people living inside the United States. You make decisions about their lives, how that's going to go.
Typically, that's how it works.
That is, I would never want to be a leader in that way. I would hate that. I very much value, I'm a fairly private person, I very much value my own autonomy. That's a big thing. that was a big thing in my life for my early 20s and through my 20s and whatnot. Just that I very much valued being able to, make my own money, pay my own rent, buy my own food. No one makes decisions for me. I go and come as I please, and that was very valuable to me. I can't imagine being in a position where literally every second of my time is spoken for the next 8 damn years.
Yeah, you don't like even having you don't like having any schedule at all.
I'm fine if I have agreed to it. But God forbid someone walks up and tells me that I need to show up at this place at this time or else. I always get upset. And it's because I know I have a strong sense of autonomy. And that's a big part of my personality. And I can get upset, but especially if some people get up in my face and start making demands. I will yell right back. No problem with that. But, if I have agreed to it, I've agreed to it. And that's because, I made my decisions. I'm happy to make this podcast. I'm happy to show up at my work because I need to show up at my work to make the money to buy food so that I can eat. That's a simple decision that I can make, But making a decision like, okay, there are these people 15,000 miles away from here who are fighting over the gates of this city, and if the people who are trying to get in, then here's what's going to happen, and then we're going to have to try to dig them out, and now our people are fighting with their people, and they're intermingled here, and do we drop a bomb right on all of them? And that's the decision that Rand has to make.
Yeah.
Do we drop a bomb on all of them and save all of the people inside of the city and save the soldiers that we would have to spend their lives digging these bad people out of this city? And then we have to spend more money rebuilding it because we just destroyed the city after retaking it. That's a horrible decision to have to make. And I believe Rand made the correct one, but I would never want to have to make it. He has to kill a bunch of his own people that are there fighting for good reasons, for the reasons that they're supposed to be there. But if they lose while these Shido columns are swinging toward them, if they lose or if they don't, if they hold until the Shido columns get there, and then the Shido just murder them all and run amok through the city.
I like the bomb analogy. It sort of reminds me of Rand as being air support, It basically only his side. Matt was the only side that had air support. The Shido didn't, which is pretty decisive in a battle like this. Yeah.
Rand's first move when he steps up on that tower is to envelop a hillside in fire. That's the first thing he does. A whole hillside. He just covers it. And I imagine it like a globe of flame that extends in a huge way.
So back to my question. I think a couple of people made this point in Discord, and I wanted to say I agreed with them, that the reason Avienda says you have TFoH is because of the information he revealed at the Golden Bowl about past what was through the columns, the crystal columns, because that broke the Aiel. That creates a remnant of a remnant. And if he doesn't help them, all the Aiel will die out. And that's why he has TFoH. That's why he has to survive. Because if he doesn't survive, all Aiel die.
Yes.
All of them.
I could take that and say, well, Rand has TFoH to the whole world, to every living creature on it. He
in a lot of ways, yeah.
Obligation to protect every single one of them.
But the one thing I will push back on that is TFoH he did something that caused a breaking of the people. He doesn't have an obligation to save everybody, but he does have an obligation to make up to the Aiel people the breaking that he caused.
Well, it's interesting that you're bringing that up. I didn't see it as Avienda saying that, listen, you hurt our culture and now you must keep us preserved, as much as you are the Dragon Reborn and the fate of the world rests on your shoulders. If you die, there's no one that can take your place. If you kill yourself because of your stupid man-chest hair ignorance, then you will ruin us all. We will all die because you were thoughtless. So be careful.
And let's not forget the undercurrent of "I love you, you bull-headed idiot. Don't hurt yourself."
Meg's, I was using a lot of naive words in there because of your stupid man hair chest or whatever, because you're thinking with the hair on your chest, I think is what she normally says. You could ruin us all with your stupid aggression. Why? Why do we need to do this?
You know, when I was a kid, my dad always got me to eat burnt toast by telling me it would put hair on my chest.
Was that really just because he didn't want to make more toast?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely, I'm sure. Or, I mean, I'm hairy as fuck, so maybe it worked. I don't know. He fed me a lot of burnt toast.
Yeah, it's charcoal. It's good for you. They give kids that when they eat poison.
Yeah, totally. It's just on the outside. Scrape it off. It's fine.
Definitely scraped off a bunch of toast in my life. I'm not above it.
Usually when I'm the one who pops it down and forgets about it in the toaster for some unknown reason. Don't worry, we'll blow through this one an hour and 55 minutes ago.
I thought it was going to go fast. It's a short chapter. We talked about a lot of things that are not presented in this chapter.
There's a lot of layers in this stuff, too, though.
That's true.
There's a lot of characters who pop in, say a few things, and
It's back to the politics and stuff, yeah.
in a lot of ways, these are always our longest chapters, the ones where nothing really happens.
We discussed this already, but I'll read very quickly. The Miagoma, the Xiand, the Dareen, and the Godara were camped within sight of one another, a few miles to the east. A steady stream of men and maidens moved between the camps, including Rand's, but only among societies, and Indarian and the other chiefs were not stirring. There was no doubt now that they would come to Rand eventually, but not until the wise ones finished their talks. "They're still talking?" Rand said. "What under the light do they have to discuss that takes so long? The chiefs are coming to follow me, not them." She gave him a flat look that would have done credit to Moraine. "The wise ones' words are for wise ones, Randolph Thor." Hesitating, she added, as if making a concession, "Egwene may tell you something of it, when it is done." Her tone implied that Egwene might not, too. But we went over that, and as far as the bureaucracy, I believe that the wise ones are doing a good job at trying to set the guidelines for the integration for these 4 new tribes to now move with all the other tribes that have already joined Rand through the wetlands and to do what Rand needs done. What Rand, I believe, doesn't realize is that the wise ones are essentially securing his power for him. He doesn't have to sit in on these meetings, does he? He doesn't have to talk to these leaders. The leaders below Rand are doing it for him. And sometimes they may seem pushy. They may seem like they're telling Rand what to do, and he may not like it. But the fact of the matter is they know better how to do their jobs than he could do their jobs for them.
Oh, he would screw it up, hands down.
So he ought to listen. He ought to listen to these people because they're his strong followers that are keeping the flock with him.
Right.
They're his little generals, for lack of a better word. They're his political generals.
And it leads me into this next part. So it talks about how Egwene is at the meeting, which came as a surprise because Moraine isn't there. Moraine says she has no time, so Egwene is basically rousted from bed and told, "Hey, get your ass up, go sit down at these meetings." And the reason I was bringing this up is because it leads to this really great scene where Avienda basically says that if Egwene had been caught in a misdeed, she would be forced to dig holes in the ground with her teeth. And Egwene starts protesting so much that Sora Leia is basically like, "Well, why would you be getting in trouble? What have you done that you think is going to get you in trouble?" And it causes that whole thing. But I don't remember where Moraine is going. That she's exactly. Yeah. I don't remember where Moraine is going, where she can't be sitting in on these enormously important meetings.
Well, we do know that Moraine is very preoccupied with looming fact of her potential death that may happen soon, and she's spending a lot of time going over the caravans, constantly checking that everything that was there is still there. Other than that, I couldn't tell you.
She was also very tired. She did spend a long time channeling and healing.
That's true. She did almost die from exhaustion again.
So I'm sure some of that time was exhaustion, But then so did Egwene, so...
And Rand.
And Rand.
I think Avienda was the only one who knew how to compose herself during a battle, which makes sense. She knew when to call herself out. She knew when she was too tired to be effective anymore. Everyone else was kind of... I mean, Egwene was much more reasonable. Rand wouldn't submit until his main lieutenants or generals or whatever you want to call them underneath him lied to him, told him that he had to go have a meeting with important members, and then he just wakes up. So we don't even know what happened. But I think that probably at some point he just passes out, or he gets to the camp, Moraine heals him, and then he falls asleep for 16 hours, or whatever it is. Rand handles himself the most poorly of the three, although I'm sure he did a lot of damage, coating the Shaido positions in fire.
And lightning, yeah. And so then after Avienda jokes and says that she had basically gotten Egwene in trouble and she thought it was hilarious, or she reveals to Rand that even after that whole battle where he's got all of this survivor's guilt and he's not sure that he did anything, you find out that the Shaido basically retreated in good order. They weren't retreating in panic. They weren't leaving things behind. They kept all of their prisoners, they kept all of their looted goods, and they basically just retreated in good order north of the River Galen. And it wasn't a quote-unquote decisive victory if you're playing, like Total War. It was more of a either a Pyrrhic victory or a close victory.
You bloodied their nose and they stepped back a few paces.
Yeah.
If this were two men boxing, you hit him good. You hit him hard, and he backed up a couple of steps, but...
Yeah, all these people died. He expended all of this effort, and in his mind, it wasn't necessarily worth it because it wasn't the easy victory. It wasn't the sweep in and do exactly what needed to be done. What does it say? With the four clans keeping Han occupied, the bulk of Couladin's people had crossed the Galen in good order, even carrying away most of the Kyrian and prisoners they had captured. Worse, they had destroyed the stone bridges behind them. That did not concern her, Avienda, but it did him. Tens of thousands of Shaido north of the river, no way to get at them until the bridges were replaced, and even wooden spans would take time. It was time that he did not have.
Well, that is quite true. Although... Rand says tens of thousands. I am a little curious about the survivors amongst the Shaido of this battle. And so we started at 160,000. 160,000, I'm going to say warriors. I guess I'm just a little curious about how many we are left with after this.
I looked all over the place for numbers. I didn't find any casualty numbers. The only number I could find was that 20,000 Shaido were taken Gaishain, which is still a mind-bogglingly large number.
Yeah, so that's 1/8 of the number of the initial army who are taken prisoner. We don't hear how many die.
And I would imagine probably double that were killed would be just a round number to assume. Because, especially with the Aiel, they're not going to surrender unless their position is untenable. And there would have been so much fighting. The number of casualties, because you're looking at such shitty terrain, you're looking at meeting engagements of quick run in, stab, run away, come back, stab again, and from a different direction. If you're walking through one of the small forested areas, there could be a spear or two behind every tree, and you're going to lose whole sections of units to ambushes.
And lightning.
And lightning where he's dropping 300 or 400 people at a time. There were tens of thousands is probably a conservative estimate of dead.
I would suspect that maybe a quarter of their number are still alive.
Up to half?
Up to half, and we have to include injured and non-combatants as well. Because amongst any army, there have to be non-combatants. You have to have blacksmiths.
And there are tons, because this is the entire Shaido nation. It's not just an army.
You have to have someone cooking dinner. You have to have all sorts of things. Warriors aren't farmers, so
this army ends up getting scattered across all of Randland. Gosh, I want to say Samael and Grendel.
Grendel?
with the fool boxes, where he ties up all the gateways, or creates all the gateways.
And Ruark holds a bunch of them until Dumai's Wells, right? But 20,000 Gaishine, or 20,000 Shido were taken Gaishine during the battle. The remaining Shadow forces retreated to Kinslayer's Dagger. There they remained bottled up by Ruark and the other Aiel until the Battle of Dumai's Wells.
And then after that, they were scattered. And then they were just a pain in the ass. Most of them got run over.
But they sure did create a lot of problems.
A lot of chaos, one might say.
Mm-hmm.
Let the Lord of Chaos rule.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, a paragraph down, we have, at the very end, when it seemed there was no more to say on the Shido, she told him what made him forget worrying about the Shido and what trouble they would cause. She just tossed it in, like she had almost forgotten. Matt killed Couladin? He said incredulously when she was done. Matt? Yeah, she seemed more interested in how he would take the news than whether or not he doubted the word.
The next thing that I really have is now Rand talking with the delegates out of Cairhien. He's too tired. No one wants him to get out of bed. He does it anyway. He tries to send Natail to go get Jayadin, his horse, and Avienda is kind of trying to stop this. She's trying to keep Rand in his bed so that he can lay there and recover. But he doesn't listen. And at some point, I suppose I'm saying that because I'm reading a bit more than I actually intended to, but she was right concerning the Terran's choices, though perhaps the maidens and others were fingering their veils had concerned them more than the wise ones. In any case, even Aracombe, a graying, slender man with a long, smoldering temper, had been near bursting aflame by the time they reined their horses around, and Gwayem, bald as a stone and wide as a blacksmith, was white-faced in rage. Asmodean was not sure whether it had been the certainty of being overwhelmed that stopped them from drawing swords, or the realization that if they somehow managed to cut a path to Rand, he was unlikely to welcome them with his allies' blood on their blades. Mylan's eyes were bulging out of his head. The man finished. But before leaving, he shouted, and this is about Mylan. Mylan's eyes were bulging out of his head, the man finished. But before leaving, he shouted out his allegiance and fealty to you. Perhaps he thought you might hear. The others echoed him quickly, yet Mylan added something that made them stare. I make a gift of Cairhien to the Lord Dragon, he said, and then he announced that he would prepare a grand triumph for you when you're ready to enter the city. I always imagine Rand pauses in this scene and says, You know, there's an old saying in the Two Rivers, Rand said dryly. The louder a man tells you he's honest, the harder you must hold on to your purse. Another says, The fox often offers to give the duck its own pond. Cairhien was his. He didn't need a gift from Mylan.
I really have to comment on that parable about the fox giving the duck its own pond.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the Aesop Fox and Raven fable around which we named the company. So
similar.
To bring that up. Yeah. Just like be careful of flattery or be careful what you're given. They're probably trying to get something out of you. It's a duck tricking or a fox tricking a duck so it can eat it.
Absolutely. I think about that Aesop fable a lot when more complicated questions about the company come up. I always think, remember, you are a nerd in a basement. I no longer live in a basement. However, I have, and I will again if it's necessary. And just remember who you are, that you're a humble, working class Joe. And it's really that simple. I guess I like to think of it as, remember that you will never really understand what's happening.
Yeah.
You can try to get as much understanding as you can. You can try to talk to people. But you'll never really understand. You have to, I don't know. You got to have allies, I guess, because you're alone out there, like any other leader of anything.
Yeah, I see it much more of as a cautionary tale, much more like the Raven has something that's valuable, and the Fox will lie and say and do anything to get.
Well, that is how the story goes.
And not necessarily it's bad on the but the Raven basically is like, hold on to the valuable things you have, because people they're valuable, right? Like, treat them as precious things and don't lose them carelessly for flattery or for other shallow reasons. Stay true to yourself. Keep your cheese.
Keep your cheese, bro.
Don't sell out, man. Keep your cheese tight.
Just saying, the rest of the chapter is mostly just, he mentions the High Lords that came to him were the ones that he sent up from Tyr because they were causing the most problems. Mm-hmm. And everybody is just back-talking and...
Or sent from Tyr to Carian because they were causing a lot of problems.
Okay, I just want to plug one thing before the readout. With all the music going on, I may have gotten distracted the other night and rewritten the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody in a Wheel of Time themed way.
Okay.
I then may have sung parts of it and put it to karaoke music and put it online.
My gosh.
I then may have posted that and gotten someone else who has a far better voice to sing some of it and also posted that online. I want people, everyone can sing along to Bohemian Rhapsody. Learn these lyrics, because there's going to be a group of people singing this at JordanCon and at SpoilerCon. Get your shit together, folks. Start learning.
Is this real life or is this fantasy? That's all. I'm sorry. You can go ahead.
No, I was just saying there's a lot of just back and forth talking, but the important part plot-wise for what's coming up is buried near the very end of the chapter. Asmodean's basically like, so you're going to have the Sun Throne, yada, yada, yada. And he's just like, in any case, I mean the Sun Throne for someone who has a right to it. He ignored the speculation on Asmodean's face. Perhaps the man had tried to help him the night before, and perhaps he had not, but he did not trust the fellow enough to let him know half of his plans. Obviously, we know who he intends to put on the Sun Throne.
And again, I almost
he loves
I really want to add that he does really care about Elaine, but also Rand doesn't want a throne. Matt doesn't want a throne. Perrin doesn't want a throne. Nobody wants a damn throne. They just want...
And they're all going to get thrones.
...to finish this stupid thing, to kill the Shadow Spawn, and just go on with their lives. And that's... I don't know quite what to say about it, other than that's a highly relatable thing. I feel that most people feel... and forget United States politics, forget Australian politics, forget European politics, and all the people that listen to the show. Maybe remember that RJ was writing this about the finest heroes he could think of, and those were men and women who disliked the idea of being in an incredible amount of power for an indefinite amount of time. They're not interested in that. They're interested in saving the world and going home. That's what they really want to do. Although at some point they admit to themselves that they probably won't be going home, because in order to save the world, well, sacrifices have to be made.
They had to change as people. The town is not going to be big enough to hold them. And the town changed. Emond's Field is no longer there. They can't go back to it. And even if they could, it wouldn't be there to go back to.
Yeah, and we could even say that by the time Emond's Field is totally evolved, I mean, they wouldn't be going home. It wouldn't be like what they remembered, but also it may be a place now that could accept them for those who make it and don't have anywhere else to go. Nynaeve has obligations to Malkier, a nation which might exist again one day. At that point, Rand probably won't be going home because he's not even him anymore. Who is he at all? He has some stuff to figure out. Matt is married to the Empress of the Shan-Chan. Perrin's the only person that's going to be staying home.
And you may go home, but you can never go back.
Yeah, and he has to rule it, which isn't exactly going home. To rule over, like, it's like, oh, you get to be king. And maybe he ends up in Saldaea with the Broken Crown.
Well, a king who was once a blacksmith, who now probably can extend his power and reach to hold all of the Mountains of Mist.
All the way up to Saldaea and then beyond, because the light is retreating?
So all of the mining operations, not just the iron, but lots of other metals, and all of the production operations. So, I mean, this could be a great nation. This is a great start. We have all of the resources in mining and metals that we could ask for, and the leader of the nation is a trained blacksmith. So I just think that Manetherin, the new Manetherin, will be a huge manufacturing powerhouse, is the way I always saw it. They have all the resources that they could need, and they have a leader who's concerned with people being able to do work, people being able to make a living, but also with his particular profession, which is crafting things out of metal. And you can make a whole empire out of that. The finest craftsmen in the world might be drawn to the blacksmith king and his mountain home. All you have to do is go to the king, show him how good your craftsmanship is, and he may, get you your own little smithy and a few apprentices, and you go to work, build something beautiful, sell it.
So what you're saying is, in another turning of the wheel, Perrin would be the leader of the dwarves of the mountains. Matt would become the leader of the elves, and the Finn, the elfin, and Rand would be the hero of the humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wouldn't have gone that far.
So, in another turning of the wheel of time is Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. See Perrin more like, landlocked nation, lots of physical resources, but lacking several. You could be like, all right, Germans, you could build tanks, but can you fuel them? And they're like, yeah, by the way, we figured out a brand new way to mine shit out of the mountain and turn that into gas, so... Oh, shit. The Germans can make fuel out of rocks.
Is that the history of coal?
That's the history of diesel engines.
Ah, gotcha.
You can take coal and make it into diesel fuel, which you can then power a tank with. So if you have all the things to build a tank, and you have coal, you can do it. You can make it run. And diesel fuel burns pretty darn clean because of the way it works.
Because of the way it is.
A compression engine, so a gas engine works, injects gasoline, and then there's a spark plug that makes a spark, creates an explosion that drives the piston. And this does this over and over with many pistons, so on. Diesel engine works differently. It works because there's only a certain amount of air in the piston, and as a piston slams down into the fuel that's been injected, it creates an incredible amount of force, and that amount of force makes the small amount of diesel at the bottom of the tube come under a tremendous amount of force, and that creates heat, which makes it explode, which fires the piston back again. So this is a wholly enclosed chamber, and you can make as many pistons in this engine as you want. Usually it's like 6 or 8 or more in really big, powerful engines. Diesel engines are actually quite efficient. They don't need, for instance, a spark plug to fire.
Sure.
In the really old ones, you stuck a lever into the side of the engine and turned a crank, and that turned the pistons until the point where they made enough force to fire it. And You better not be holding the crank when it fires, because it'll break your wrist right off. Well, that's how it worked originally. And, I mean, it's an ingenious design, really. With the power of a man's arm, you can create this little fire, which will make a tank run. It's amazing. From the liquids that can be extracted from a rock. Wow. And that's 100-year-old technology.
So the reason diesel engines don't need a spark plug and gasoline engines do is that when diesel actually has a lower temperature ignition point. And so what happens is, as that piston compresses the volume, it increases the pressure and the temperature, and
which are synonymous for anyone who doesn't understand.
Yeah, so
if you increase the pressure, you
times
increase the temperature.
Right. Assuming you keep the volume the same. And if you're keep decreasing the volume, anyway. PV over T, guys, PV over T. And what the temperature gets hot enough in there that you reach the ignition point of the diesel and it spontaneously combusts. it doesn't happen that way with the gasoline engine, so you actually need that spark to ignite it.
Right, it's quite different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's why the timings matter a lot in engines, because if you're sparking it at the wrong time, you can really mess up.
Gasoline engine car, when it's very cold out, I haven't ever lived in very extreme conditions, but when it's very cold out, it can take a minute to start, but because you're using electricity to start it, it doesn't really need to be warm or anything to make that spark happen. You could just turn your little key and your powerful electronic battery makes a little spark, and that fires some gasoline, and it starts right away. In a large piece of construction equipment or something like that, or a big truck that runs on a diesel engine, you have these little warmers. And so there is a battery in most diesel engines. But I remember, growing up in the Northeast, and I had a side gig where I worked at a tool rental company, and a lot of my job was moving the tools around to display them and things like that. And a lot of these tools were like, big backhoes and stuff like that. And I just had to drive them a few feet. It's very fun, but that's all I really ever had to do. The point is, on a cold winter day, when you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go down to the job site, and it's, 15 degrees outside or 10 degrees outside, you get into the truck, huddled in your woolens, and you turn the key, and then you wait about 3 minutes. And there are just little things that heat the fuel. There are little protrusions in the cylinder that stick in there and just warm the air. And then after about 3 minutes, a little light will turn on your dashboard, and then you can turn the key, and that actually starts the ignition. But if you were to try to start the ignition before it's too warm, or before it's warm enough, I should say, it won't fire. The pistons will try. It'll compress the gas, but it won't fire because it's too cold. So even the force of the piston won't do it. I don't know why I'm telling this story. It's the wine. I just have long, distinct memories of being like, cool, now I'm here at work, and you turn the key on, and then you just sit there for a while, waiting for the gas to get hot enough. It would be easier if this was a story, he thought. In stories, there were only so many surprises before the hero knew everything he needed. He himself never seemed to know a quarter of everything. Asmodean hesitated. That old saying about shouting men might be applied to him, too, as he was no doubt aware. But when Rand said no more, he added, I think he wants you to be king of Cairhien, subject to you, of course, and preferably with me far away. Mylan probably expected Rand to return to Tyr and to Kalandor. Mylan certainly would never be afraid of too much power. Of course. Asmodean sounded even drier than Rand had. There was another visit between those two. A dozen Cairhienan lords and ladies, without retainers, came cloaked and with faces hidden in their hoods despite the heat. Plainly, they knew that the Aiel despised the Cairhienan, and just as plainly returned the sentiment. Yet they were as nervous that Mylan might discover they had come as that the Aiel might decide to kill them. When they saw me, Asmodean said wryly, half seemed ready to kill me for fear I was a tyrant. You have Fardaris Mai to thank that you still have a bard. Few as they were, the Cairhienan had still been harder to turn back than Mylan, growing sweatier and more white-faced by the minute, but stubbornly demanding to see the Lord Dragon. It was a measure of their desire that when their demands failed, they finally descended to open begging. Asmodean might have thought the Aiel humor odd or harsh, but he chuckled over nobles in silk coats and riding dresses trying to pretend he was not there, as they knelt to catch the Wise One's woolen skirts. Soralea threatened to have them stripped and flogged back to the city. His muted laughter turned to disbelieving. They actually discussed it among themselves. Had the requirement allowed them to reach you, I do believe some would have accepted. Sorlia should have done it, Avienda put in, surprisingly agreeable. The Oathbreakers have no honor. At least Mullane and the maidens throw them across their horses like bundles and run the animals from camp, with the Oathbreakers hanging on as they might. Asmodean nodded. But before that, 2 of them did speak to me. Once they were certain I was not a Terran spy, Lord de Brain and Lady Colavere. They clouded everything in so many hints and innuendos that I cannot be certain, but I would not be surprised if they mean to offer you the Sun Throne. They could bandy words with some people I used to be acquainted with. Rand barked a laugh. Maybe they will, if they can manage the same turns as my lawn. He had not needed Moraine to tell him that Kyrian played the game of houses in their sleep, nor Asmodean to tell him that they would try it with the Forsaken. The High Lords to the left of the Kyrianan to the right. The High Lords to the left and the Kyrianan to the right. One battle done, and another, of a different sort if no less dangerous. In any case, I mean the Sun Throne for someone who has a right to it. He ignored the speculation on Asmodean's face. Perhaps the man had tried to help him the night before, and perhaps he had not, but he did not trust the fellow enough to let him know half his plans. However much Asmodean's future might be tied to his loyalty was all necessity, and he was still the same man who had chosen to give his soul to the Shadow. My land wants to give me a grand entry when I am ready, does he? So much the better that I see what's what before he expects me. It came to him why Avienda had become so agreeable, even helping the talk along. As long as he sat there talking, he was doing exactly what she wanted. Are you going to get my horse, Natail? Or must I? Asmodean's bow was deep, formal, and on the surface, at least, sincere. I serve the Lord Dragon.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?
We'll sing all night and drink all day, and on the girls we'll spend our pay, and when it's gone then we'll away
To dance with Jack of the Shadows.
Perfect. Beautiful.